Greetings and salutations, and yeah, 100% Vale. Mephistopheles is just fucking evil. That band is so fucking good. So good. Yeah, we're sitting in the new throne. We're lounging for the Lord here. It's quite lovely. Big thanks to the in-laws for getting me and Dex these cool gamer chairs. They are far fancier than I am used to dealing with, but they work out really well. So, thank you for being here, Bale, and anybody else who's lurking. Thanks for joining me. It's the season finale. We have come to the end again of season 4. Or season 3. Fuck, we're ahead of ourselves. Yeah, I don't know why we're still doing this, but we're still doing this. And you keep showing up, so I keep doing this shit. So thank you very much. I enjoy it, but I also keep at it because you folks are just so nice about it. So we've covered a lot in our 3 seasons together. We really have. We have gone through it all, and we started with Shamgar. Yeah, that's the series finale. I'm gonna take a bunch of psychedelics and just fucking speak my piece until I'm arrested or get TOS. But yeah, so we started this with a Shamgar joke and somehow have ended here. And we've had some fun along the way. We've had heretics and heroes and everything in between. So I wanted to end the season in this kind of way because it also leads into a good start to next season. But what I wanted to do was something that I don't know how many people know this, but the Bible, when you read it, it is not presented in chronological order. What it seems to tell a story, right? You start with Genesis, and this alien shows up, and he creates the heaven and the earth, and then he puts some people on it, and he sprinkles in some animals, and the people don't listen, so he kicks them out of his eternal garden. And then he decides that he's had enough of the whole thing, so he kills everybody except for one family and starts over. Why he didn't just kill everyone and start over completely, I guess that didn't work for the narrative. And then, the people come again, and he picks one specific set of people and says, these are my jam, these are the homies, these are who I really care about. And so then he sends an ill tempered dragon to hang out with them that spends the next few hundred years roasting thousands and thousands of them for what seem like arbitrary reasons because they didn't like the incense right or whatever, or just because he was having a bad day. Who knows with this guy? Then all of a sudden, the dragon bounces and the book just stops. Couple hundred years pass that nobody talks about, and then they all of a sudden the god from the first half of the book, who had his ill-tempered dragon buddy and striking people down, floods, confusing languages, hardening of hearts, all of these things happen. All of a sudden he's had a change of temperament, and he's super chill now. And he only punishes you because you make him. He's totally not into it. It's not his thing. He loves you so much, he's going to send his kid to suffer not only a brutal death, but then have Mel Gibson retell it in the most anti Semitic of fashions. Yeah, this hurts me more than it hurts you. Yeah, that guy. All of a sudden, he's that dude. His kid gets nailed to some 2x4s, comes back from the dead, appears to some people, then vanishes. And then if you're following Joseph Smith's story, he appears, in the North American continent and is super racist for some reason. And, and then he tells you at the end that he's coming back. And when he does, it's a fuck around, find out kind of situation if you didn't believe in him. Dying made me racist. That's what it was. He wasn't racist before he died, but that really took it out of him. That pushed him too far. So that's kind of the narrative. And it makes a somewhat plausible narrative. You know, you start, there's nothing, then you get the earth created, people live on it, they keep, they go through the cycles of fucking up, finding out. Then all of a sudden, God decides that, he's going to catch more flies with honey than vinegar. So he tries to be nice, and they brutally kill his kid, but apparently that was part of the plan. It makes a followable narrative. But that is missing to me something that's really important, especially if you are a skeptic. Like, well, let's be honest, if you're here, you are. So, what that takes out is context. Because another thing that just about every Christian that I know takes at face value is that the guy's name who's on the book must have written the book. They don't know who Daniel is, but they know that he definitely wrote Daniel. That's why it's called Daniel. And that Hosea definitely wrote Hosea because that's why it's called Hosea. And, they know that Moses supposedly wrote the Pentateuch, which is, of course, the first 5 books of the Bible. And, they just kind of take all this at face value. David wrote the Psalms, Solomon wrote the Proverbs. It's just, that's how they take it. And even if that were true, Hamlet wrote Hamlet. Obviously, Julius Caesar wrote Julius Caesar. Romeo and Juliet. Duh, come on, get it together. Exactly. This is the kind of nonsensical thinking that I feel like Christians, they take this at face value. And I know for a fact from growing up in the church, nobody ever pulls you aside and corrects that. Nobody ever pulls you aside and goes, Genesis wasn't first, right? Ain't that the truth? Nobody ever pulls you aside and corrects it and goes, these are out of order. And if you put them in order, as well as look at the historical context of the time that they were written, an agenda emerges. And it's almost like what they wrote was, I know you guys are getting sick of me on this, but I really can't let it go. There's a political motive to all of it. Everything in this book was written for political reasons. And just like the Republicans use it as a cudgel to batter people with today to advance their political agenda, the books were created with a political agenda. Now, I do need to clarify, that wasn't always negative. We're going to start off with some of these books that were absolutely written for a political agenda that I 100% wholeheartedly support, and I believe most of you will too, because if you don't support the political agenda, please get the fuck off my channel once we start this up. I'm not kidding. But that's beside the point for right now. These are political. But if you don't have the historical concept, if you don't know the context, and you don't understand the timeline, that narrative is much murkier. And that the reason they were arranged the way they were is because, again, it serves a different agenda. It downplays all that political stuff and makes it seem like a much more cohesive tale that is easy for people to read and follow along with and feel like they're following a unified narrative. Because if you read them in order, it jumps all over the place, and certain parts of it really stick out as being clear, politically opportune things to write, not actually the divine inspired word of God. Like every other historical document that's ever been fucking unearthed, they had a reason for writing this down, and it wasn't because God told them to. It was far more selfish than that. So let's dive in and start to understand the real order these books were written in and why they were written at all. Keep in mind that when the Bible started being written, the books have become the Bible. Many of the stories that were written had existed for generations. They were passed down through oral tradition, familial storytelling. Nobody had bothered to write it down because why would you need it written down? You told the story to your kids, they told the story to their kids. That's how it worked. Why would you write it down? Then they had to write it down. And we'll get into the political implications of all that. So, again, thank you for being here. It's about to get wild. So, we just wanted to, it seems you've got these mixed up. Let me fix that for you. So, we're going to look, I think, if we're going to talk about the chronological order, we need to take just a minute and look at the way they are structured now. Anybody can look up the order that the books of the Bible go in, but they are grouped into that order is claimed to be subsets to make them all make sense. Start off with the Pentateuch. First 5 books: Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. Genesis, you start your story off. Exodus, the chosen ones leave Egypt. Leviticus is a bunch of rules about how they're supposed to live. Numbers is a dragon massacring and decimating those people, as well as a couple censuses. And then Deuteronomy takes those first 5 books and recaps them in a more priest-driven narrative, if you will. It attempts to be more of like a historical compendium of the first 4 books. Then you get your Judges: Joshua, Judges, Ruth. Those 3 books, those are put there to let you know about the time of God's people living in Canaan before they became a monarchy. Then you get the histories of the kings: 1st and 2nd Samuel, 1st and 2nd Kings, and 1st and 2nd Chronicles. These jump back and forth, which sometimes can be jarring to the reader because they reference a story that hasn't actually happened yet on the timeline, and then they go forward to way forward in the timeline. It can be confusing. It can be a lot to try to keep up with. But the basic idea is you go from King Saul all the way through all the various kings that the two kingdoms had when they were split. And you got your tales of exile. Kings really is the lost of the Bible. You're not kidding. You get our tales in exile: Ezra, Nehemiah, Esther. Of course, Esther gave us the amazing Jewish holiday Purim. If you have not ever had Hamantashen, you're fucking missing out. It's a delightful cookie that you celebrate that looks like pig's ears because the bad guy of the story, Haman, who seeks to destroy the Jews, is eventually hung and has his ears wicked like a pig before they hang him. So Hamantashen literally translates Haman's ears, and you eat cookies every year and basically have Jewish Halloween where you dress up like, you dress up like one of the characters from the story. It's a lot of fun. You read the Megillah, which is basically the story of it in Hebrew, and it's a fantastic holiday. I've celebrated it numerous times. A lot of fun. A Merry Jubilee. But yeah, and Nehemiah really gets into kind of an impetus. Hey, we need to go back and rebuild the temple. We got to get out of here. We got to get the Persians to let us go so we can go back and rebuild the temple. Then you get to the deep thoughts and praise hymns: Job, Psalms, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, and Song of Songs. Solomon sometimes sung someone. These are a lot of platitudes and songs, and of course Job is the most depressing story ever, and Ecclesiastes is actually a very interesting book. I know a lot of non-Christians who still read Ecclesiastes because it's kind of like a self-help book with some very interesting, almost poetic language. Again, very interesting book. But yeah, that's what these are. They're just they don't follow any real narrative. They're just, Job, of course, exists in like its own timeline, if you will. And you get the major prophets: Isaiah, Jeremiah, the Lamentations. People believe that, either Ezekiel or Jeremiah wrote Lamentations. We don't really know for sure. It wasn't a guy named Lamentations. And then, of course, Ezekiel and Daniel. These are the major prophets. If you talk to Christians, do not use major prophets, minor prophets with Jewish people. They take that as an insult, and rightly so. But then the minor prophets, Hosea, Joel, Amos, Obadiah, Jonah, Micah, Nahum, Habakkuk, Zephaniah, Haggai, Zechariah, Malachi. Every kid who ever had to memorize all the books of the Bible in order has learned that little rhyming technique to help you remember all these guys that your preacher never fucking talks about. But why? Why is that? Why do they never talk about those guys? Well, I have some theories. But the main one would be that most of those guys that you see there at the end that nobody ever talks about, like I highly doubt you went to too many church services where he said, open up your Bible to the book of Amos. Or open up your Bible to the book of Micah. Didn't happen real often in my church. I'm sure it didn't happen real often in yours. I've been to a lot of churches. It doesn't happen often. Well, it could be because those prophets are something we like to call the social justice prophets. They fucking threw down for social justice. Yeah, if you think social justice just got cool, you clearly haven't been reading the right parts of the Bible. Because there is some dope shit there. Yes, JP's. But now I'm going to show you the order of the books of the Bible in the way that I think will help them make sense to you. This is the order that they were written in. A lot of these dates are in a range. We don't have exact dates. Like nobody put that, hey, I wrote the book of fucking Micah today. Nobody put that down. But with my system, I think it will help you understand what's actually going on and the political motivations for why these books were written when they were and why they were created in general, because the order isn't even close. And so whenever you need to think about what was the context of this book of the Bible, why was this written, I want you to think about my cock, okay? Of course I'm referring to Riff's chronological order context key. If you use Riff's cock, it will keep the Bible from getting too hard for you, okay? That's all there is to it. So anytime the Bible is confusing, just think about my cock, and that will help unconfuse it for you, okay? We good? So you start off, you have the monarchic social justice prophets. These books are written from around 745 to 605 BCE. That would include Amos, the first 39, it's a handy tool, right? The first 39 chapters of Isaiah, Hosea, and Micah. These were written, the reason we know that those dates work is because 745 was just before the fall of the northern tribes of Israel. They were sacked in 722. 605, that's when Babylon shit the bed and the Medo-Persian Empire really took over. We know that these books, through the context clues, the way language was used, things of that nature, we know that these books were written in that time frame. So there's your oldest books right there. The oldest books in the Bible are the ones that are tucked away at the end of the Old Testament that your preacher never talks about. Then you get the prophets of impending doom. Nahum, Zephaniah, and Habakkuk. They wrote after the fall of Babylon, after the fall of the Assyrian Empire, and before the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem, which happened in 586, and the Jews were carried away in exile. Then you have the stories that were written while they were in exile. Obadiah, Joshua, Judges, your Samuels, your Kings, the first version of Deuteronomy, the first kind of take on it. It was revised later, as many of these were. Jeremiah, Ezekiel, and the later chapters of Isaiah. That's really important. People love to talk about how Isaiah and Jeremiah foretold the destruction of Israel and all that. No, they didn't. They wrote that shit when it had already happened. Stop playing yourself. They did not foretell shit. Those books were written for very specific reasons that we're going to get into. They were not prophetic. They were historic. Then you get your post-exile, pre-Hellenistic period. This is after they had been released from exile and had gone back and were basically kind of self-governing in their own little way. They were a vassal state for really all intents and purposes. And they needed some more backstory. So, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, a revision of Deuteronomy, the end chapters of Isaiah, they redid Jeremiah, Haggai, Zechariah, Malachi, and the first book of Chronicles. Those all get written before the Hellenistic time. Then in the Hellenistic period, you get Ezra, Nehemiah, Job, Ecclesiastes, the second version of Chronicles, or second Chronicles book, Jonah, and the kind of final put together Psalms, and then Lamentations is put together. Again, Lamentations is often presented as being written right when they went into exile. Like basically the day after Jerusalem fell, this guy sits down and writes about how shitty it is that, they didn't listen to God, so they, how bad. Now, they wrote this stuff way after that. They had already been out of exile for a couple hundred years when that book got written. And then the Maccabean era. Look at that. Daniel, Esther, Ruth, and Songs of Songs that Solomon sung softly on Sundays. Those were the last ones in the Old Testament written. As you see, that shit was written awfully close to the time of Christ. So again, people talk about Daniel foretelling the Babylonian Empire. We were already through with the Greek Empire and into the Romans when that shit got written. Again, it was not prophetic, it was historic. We have pretended that it is prophetic. So again, Riff's cock helps keep you straight, okay? So, let's start with the social justice prophets. And like these guys, we're gonna get spicy here because these guys are throwing down. They sow the wind and reap the whirlwind. What a fucking line. These oldest books in the Bible are some of the dopest literature you could ever read, and every doom band in existence, nothing you write will ever be this dope. I'm sorry. Like, you lost to a guy that lived 3,000 years ago. They wrote during the end of the Kingdom of Israel. They were especially focused on the abuse of the poor by the wealthy class. I can't imagine why Joel Osteen doesn't like to crack these books open. I mean, what possible reason could that lascivious cunt have for not wanting to talk about poor people being exploited by the rich? Because this was really common at this time. In the northern kingdoms, it was relatively a peaceful time, and they had amassed some wealth. But there was a huge chasm between the wealthy and the poor, not unlike today, to the point that the poor were basically forced to sell themselves into slavery to help pay for things. You know, all those things that were outlined in the book of Leviticus, which would, if you read the Bible in order, you would think, oh, well, God ordained that slavery was cool way back in the day in Leviticus, so when there was slavery in the kingdom times, that was cool. No. First of all, slavery's never cool. Second of all, no, they wrote those shit in Leviticus years after the fact to justify the behavior that they had engaged in. Don't fucking get it twisted. These prophets were super vocal about their care for the poor, and that they kept saying, if you guys don't start taking care of the poor, if we don't stop shitting on our fellow man, our fellow Jew, who is, one of us, if we don't stop exploiting these people, God's going to lay the smackdown on all of us. I mean, again, it's all going to go up in flames if we don't start taking care of people. Sounds like a fairly familiar refrain from today that would be at home with anything that we talk about today. But, yeah, again, nobody's cracking. I don't see anybody, those Bible thumpers on Capitol Hill. Highly doubt they would open up the book of Amos and start quoting. They're not going to quote Micah or Nahum because they're dicks. With the exception of Isaiah, these prophets have all been relegated by modern Christians to the incredibly dismissive category of minor prophets. If you say that to a Hebrew scholar, go tell him, oh, these are one of the minor prophets, they will tell you, who defined them as minor, who decided that just because it was a short, and again, that is where a lot of the context in is, again, they're going for volume here, that If you have a big, long book, you must be an important prophet. And if you have a short, well written, concise book that sticks to an honest narrative, you must be a minor prophet. And so they relegate you to the back of the book. And hey, the Ripps-Cox system lets you know it's not just about how big it is, it's where you put it. Okay? So let's take a look at some of the prophecies or the writings from the social justice prophets, and you tell me if this is still relevant today, if this would make sense to be taught in churches today. Good morning, Barry. Let's see if the Ripps-Cox system helps you understand that this could be relevant today. This is from Amos, the oldest book in the Bible. There are those who hate the one who upholds justice in court and detest the one who tells the truth. You levy a straw tax on the poor and impose tax on their grain. Therefore, you have built stone mansions, you will not live in them. Though you have planted lush vineyards, you will not drink their wine. Again, it's pretty straightforward there. You're taxing the poor to build these beautiful houses for yourselves. I'm not going to let you get a chance to live in them. You've planted these lush vineyards. You're not going to drink that wine because you're being a dick. It was very common back then. You think our justice system is fucked up now? It was really fucked up back then. And essentially, you could just buy your justice. And so there was no justice for the poor. And Amos was pissed about it. Hear this, you who trample the needy and do away with the poor of the land, saying, when will the new moon be over, that we may sell grain, and the Sabbath be ended, that we may market wheat, skimping on the measure, boosting the price, and cheating with dishonest scales, buying the poor with silver, and the needy for a pair of sandals, selling even the sweepings with the wheat. And I mean, right there, you've seen Karate Kid too, where they were using the fake weights and measures to cheat the people. That's exactly what was going on here, and Amos was not for it. They also, they were taking the threshings of the wheat, the part that was not usable for bread, mixing it in, selling poor people bad food is wrong? McDonald's, do you fucking hear me? Boosting the price, cheating with dishonest scales, buying the poor with silver, and the needy for a pair of sandals. You mean exploiting people is wrong? And forcing people to overpay for basic necessities because they can't afford to finance them like a rich person is wrong? Yes, it's fucking wrong. This guy said it was wrong fucking almost 3,000 years ago. It's right there in your Bible. Preachers could preach on this anytime they fucking want to. And they don't. They skip it. But with the Ripps-Cox system, you now understand this is the oldest shit in the Bible because it was what they needed to hear back then. That, hey, the Bible should start with, be nice to the fucking poor. Take care of them. Don't shit on them. They're people too. That's how the Bible's supposed to start. Just throwing that out there. I despise your religious festivals. Your assemblies are a stench to me. Even though you bring me burnt offerings and grain offerings, I will not accept them. Though you bring choice fellowship offerings, I will have no regard for them. Away with the noise of your songs. I will not listen to the music of your harps, but let justice roll on like a river, righteousness like a never-failing stream. If that doesn't get you fired up, I would like to inform you that you have nothing inside you to get fired up. I mean, could this not be more cut and dry for the Joel Osteens of the world? I despise your festivals. Your assemblies are a stench to me. He's flat out saying, I don't care that you have 12,000 people or whatever you fit in your giant megachurch. Don't care. All of your party, all of your offerings, all of this stuff, I don't care. Yeah, your Jesus jet. He doesn't care. He doesn't want to hear your 36-piece praise band on stage. playing, some obnoxious trancy song where you say hallelujah and a bunch of dipshits and button downs go, fuck all that noise. Go take care of the sick. Go take care of the poor. That's what you're supposed to be fucking doing. And Jesus is going to bring the hammer down. Justice roll on like a river. Righteousness like a never failing stream. That's a fucking line. That's a vibe. And that's the vibe that you're supposed to get from the first book of the Bible. Amos is pissed. Amos is telling it like it is. He says, it's all going to come down because we are failing as people. Notice he's not, right there. It could not be more clear that God does not care about all the frivolity, all the ritual, all the bullshit. He cares about your actions. So naturally, we should tuck this book at the back of our Bible and never talk about it, because it makes us all look like dickholes. It wasn't just Amos. Micah was spitting some fire too. Listen, you leaders of Jacob, you rulers of Israel. Should you not embrace justice, and you who hate good and love evil, who tear the skin from my people and the flesh from their bones, who eat my people's flesh, strip off their skin and break their bones in pieces, who chop them up like meat for the pan, like flesh for the pot. Then they will cry out to the Lord, but he will not answer them. At that time he will hide his face from them because of the evil they have done. Again, he's referring to the exploitation of the worker. Micah saw that in order to finance the lifestyle of the wealthy in the northern kingdom, they basically had chattel slavery, and they treated their people like shit. Their own people, their brothers and sisters, their flesh and blood, they treated them like shit. They exploited the proletariat for the benefit of the bourgeoisie, and Micah said God is gonna get you for it. Whoops, wrong button. As for the prophets who lead my people astray, they proclaim peace if they have something to eat, but prepare to wage war against anyone who refuses to feed them. Therefore night will come over you without visions, and darkness without divination. The sun will set for the prophets, and the day will go dark for them. This was another common problem. There were a lot of prophets back then. A lot. And these guys basically... Remember our story just a couple weeks ago about, this guy never has anything nice to say about me. He never gives me a good prophecy. Well, that's because there were a whole lot of guys back then who, for the right price, would tell you any prophecy you wanted. If you donated money to their little cult, if you made sure that they had gifts of food and... Yeah, again, so shocked that there were lots of prophets spouting BS for financial gain. Again, I've referenced him like 5 times. I'm not letting up on this cunt. Fuck you, Joel Osteen. Your prosperity gospel and all that bullshit. Why don't you go prosper the poor? You fucking dick. Her leaders judge for a bribe. Her priests teach for a price. And her prophets tell fortunes for money. Yet they look for the Lord's support and say, is not the Lord among us? No disaster will come upon us. Therefore, because of you, Zion will be plowed like a field. Jerusalem will become a heap of rubble, the Temple Hill a mound overgrown with thickets. Again, really could not be more clear in what he's talking about there. You have shit on the poor, you have abused them, you've disrespected your fellow man, all in the name of filthy lucre, and now look at you. You're gonna get fucked up. I'm gonna bring the thunder down. Tried to warn them. Motherfuckers didn't listen. They fucked around. Now it's time to find out. So, those are the social justice prophets. I encourage everyone, go back and read those books. There's some fire in there. You want to actually read a part of the Bible that could be relevant to today, that could help you be a better person, or at least help others understand. Yeah, go read the social justice prophets. There's fire in there, and it is very telling that the modern church completely disregards the oldest, and I think it's funny, they're the oldest things in the book, and they're probably the most culturally relevant still today. But let's move on. So now that the social justice prophets, for our riffs, context, chronological order, context, key, riffs, cock for short, The Rivers-Cox system tells us, okay, these guys were telling us, hey man, I think society's going astray. Shit's gonna get bad if we don't rein it in. Well, we've now moved on to the shit has gotten bad section of the Bible. These, of course, are our prophets of impending doom, written right after the northern tribes had been destroyed and the southern tribes were starting to fall apart. And these guys are like, yo, remember what happened up north? Same shit's gonna happen down here, bro, if we don't get our shit together and stop shitting on poor people. No, you probably didn't hear a fucking thing from those during your church days. Because nobody likes to talk about them because they make poor people feel bad. And if poor people feel bad, they won't give your church a lot of money. So, let's move to the prophets of impending doom. And yeah, it's like a sleep sound check. You know the doom is coming, and it's coming hard. Nahum, he writes about the destruction of Nineveh, the capital city of the Assyrian Empire. Christians love to say that he was prophesying about the destruction of the Assyrian Empire. He was not, because this book was likely written about 7 years after its destruction. For those of you who don't know the historical context, the Neo-Assyrian Empire was in modern-day kind of Syria and Iraq, and Nineveh was their capital city. Multiple times in the Bible, it's referenced as being a very wicked city. I don't know that we could ever historically ascribe it being any more wicked than any other city. More than likely, it was just, they had oppressed the Jews, so the Jews wrote that they were really mean guys. Yeah, more of a disagree with people. I mean, they were known for some brutal punishments of, they did some brutal shit. There's definitely that these people were not brutal, but the world was a brutal place back then. I'm not ready to ascribe them as being any worse than anybody else. Context. That's why we have the Rivers-Cox system. Puts things where it needs to go. Right to the point. So he talks about that. Assyria, eventually, what happened was the king died, and he had 2 sons. One son said, I'm going to stay here and run Assyria. You go run Babylon. Together we'll be the Neo-Assyrian Babylonian Empire. And then the one brother double-crossed the other and smashed Nineveh. And, it's where it became the Babylonian Empire, not the Assyrian Babylonian Empire. Zephaniah, he actually did seem to be a little bit ahead of the game. Although, again, it doesn't take divine foresight to see enemies massing on your borders, political corruption running rampant and dismantling your ability to defend yourself or to prepare your country for what's coming. Yeah, it's kind of writing on the wall thing. It would be like a guy saying, right before World War II broke out, tensions are high in Europe. That's not really prophecy, that's reading the room. Because you want doom, that's how you get doom. Habakkuk, he was in a similar state. He was writing of the impending doom that the Babylonians would wreak on Jerusalem just before it happened. And his shit is metal as fuck. You want to write a great doom album? Just go crib the lines to Habakkuk shit. No one will know, because again, nobody really reads that book either. But man, there's some stuff in there. Such as Nahum. You will not have any descendants to carry on your name. I will destroy the idols and metal images that are the temple of your gods. I will make a grave for you because you are wicked. The people lose their courage, and their knees knock, stomachs ache, and everyone's face grows pale. Many are dead. Their bodies are piled up, too many to count. People stumble over the dead bodies. Yeah, Nahum, he did not paint a picture of happiness there. That is a picture of, oh shit, we're fucked. Zephaniah. That day shall be a day of darkness and deep gloom, a day of densest clouds. I will sweep away man and beast. I will sweep away the birds of the sky and the fish of the sea. I will make the wicked stumble, and I will destroy mankind from the face of the earth, declares the big fucking space dragon. That's doom as fuck. He's killing the birds and the fish, he's so angry. That is insane. Zephaniah, no chill there. And Habakkuk, this one is awesome. You are doomed. You have made your family rich with what you took by violence and have tried to make your own home safe from harm and danger. But your schemes have brought shame on your family. By destroying many nations, you have only brought ruin on yourself. Even the stones of the walls cry out against you, and the rafters echo the cry. You are doomed. You founded a city on crime and built it up by murder. The nations you conquered wore themselves out in useless labor, and all they have built goes up in flames. The big fucking space dragon has done this. I mean, seriously, that's metal as fuck. So yeah, that was the context there. Again, so all of those books written before the Jews officially go into exile. All those books are, hey, we should be better people. We should take care of the poor. We should take care of the weak. We shouldn't trample all over people. We shouldn't be chasing the almighty dollar or shekel in their time. We shouldn't be worried about all that shit. We should be worried about being good people. Notice, there's nothing in there. He flat out says, I don't care about your sacrifices. I don't care about how you worship me. That's not what's important. What's important is taking care of people and being good. I think it's very, very telling that the first things written were not dogma. They were not rules. They were not, ceremonies and practices. It wasn't history. It wasn't liturgy. It was any of that. The first things that were written were social justice. We're about being decent people. And so naturally, we don't ever open those books in our churches. Because we're not worried about being decent people. We're worried about theater and fucking Harry Potter stories. Let's move on. So now the Jews are in exile. In our little timeline here with the Rifts-Cox system, we now know that the people Jerusalem's been destroyed. The diaspora is real. They now are living in Babylon. They're hanging out there with Nebuchadnezzar. Shit ain't great. Well, eventually, Babylon falls to the Persians. And the Persians, they have no interest in keeping these people subjugated there. It's way more economically viable to send them back to where they came from and just extract tribute from them. This makes way more sense to them. But it will not make financial sense if they have to constantly go over there and put them in their place, or if they're constantly infighting about who should be running their little puppet state. Can't have that. So the Persians tell them, look, they tell their leaders, we want to let you guys out. We want to let you guys go. But you need a backstory. You need some way to declare somebody in charge, and you need a way to validate that. So I don't really care what you come up with, but I don't have time to be dealing with you guys. You need to declare somebody in charge. That person needs to be, owing to me. And as long as you do that, you can go home. You can go back to your land. I don't care about you. I'm not here to subjugate you. You just pay me my fucking money. So that is where all of these oral histories that had been going on for so long, they all came back. Obadiah is the shortest book in the Bible. It calls out the people of Edom for helping the Babylonians loot Jerusalem. They were technically cousins to Israel. And Obadiah, he didn't think it was very cool. Why were they cousins? Well, if you remember the story of Jacob and Esau, that Jacob, of course, who became the father of all the Israeli people, Esau was his older brother who technically should have gotten the birthright and the blessing from their father Abraham. He did not. Why did he not? Or from Isaac, their father Isaac, I'm sorry. He should have got the blessing. Why? Because Jacob was a sneaky little bitch who stole the blessing and the divine right. Well, Esau never let that go. Esau was always kind of depicted as like a mountain man. Well, his descendants were supposedly the Edomites. They lived in like a mountainous region just outside of Israel, and were constant antagonists, sometimes allies of the Jews. But technically, the Jews still considered them to be like relatives because of this, again, alleged shared backstory. And so Obadiah, he just basically writes out, it's coming for you too, buddy. Don't enjoy looting our temple too much. Joshua, Judges, the Samuels, the Kings, version 1 of Deuteronomy, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, Isaiah's second part, they're all that oral history. They're like, okay, we need a backstory, right? So how do we come up with a backstory? Well, we pick who's going to be in charge, and we write all this stuff down and pretend that we've always agreed on this shit. This helped them set up a new ruling class. They basically wanted to, and I think what's really important in here, what's super important, is this is where you get the Samuels and the Kings. And what did we talk about is one of the key themes of the Samuels and the Kings books? We talked about the fact that they show that God always told the Israelites they shouldn't have a king. That a king is a bad idea. And that a king will lead you down the road to ruin. Isn't it convenient that at a time when the Israelites were being released to go back to their area, but they weren't allowed to have a king. Instead, it was decided that the high priest would be the one who ruled over them, so to speak, and that they would basically be a religious monarchy, if you will. Isn't it really convenient that at that time a whole bunch of literature appears that says kings are bad? And if you have kings, bad things. Again, Rifscock helps you measure it all up that something doesn't add up here. There was a lot of editing, a lot of creative license taken in those books, but we got motherfucking Shamgar, so, pretty excited about that. Some of the cool parts of those books, you get Obadiah. He's talking to Edom here. I will make you weak. Everyone will despise you. Your pride has deceived you. Your capital is a fortress of solid rock, your home high in the mountains. So you say to yourself, who can ever pull me down? Even though you make your home as high as an eagle's nest, so that it seems to be among the stars, yet I will pull you down. I think, Uncle Acid wrote an entire album off that verse. And then, of course, Shamgar, the riffs version of that would be, I've had enough of your Philistine bullshit. Come at me, bro. Yippee-ki-yay, motherfucker. That's kind of how I envision how Shamgar actually went down. They had to tone it down because it was just that awesome. So now, what we see, when we measure the cock here, is that we've got the Israelites back in their land, and they're being run by the high priest. And again, we've had a lot of literature now that's been released that has demonized the idea of a king. No. You need to have the priests, not the king. And at this time, the priests begin to go about their business, writing literature. Now they're going to write the real backstory. Okay, we've gone back and shown that we're the ones who should be the priests because of lineage and the judges and all that stuff, and we've organized the tribes again, and everybody's cool, right? We got this. So now, let's go back and establish all the dogma that will, again, ensure our rule as priests, because we have all these rules that we have to adhere to and we have to obey, and only we know how to do it right. I mean, again, are you catching on here? Is the cock straightening you out? The rule of the clergy. Alexander the Great. Now, as we go through this time, the Persians eventually fall to Alexander. He had a very hands-off way of dealing with them because he didn't care. Exactly, Barry. Exactly. So Alexander's position was super easy. I don't care. You're a doorway to Egypt and nothing more. That is what he thought of Palestine. He was so disinterested in them, in fact, that Flavius Josephus actually made up a story about Alexander coming to visit, and that he totally thought the Jews were cool and even went to their shrine and offered up a sacrifice to the Hebrew God. There is about 0.001% chance that actually fucking happened. But that's how hands off he was. That Jewish historians had to make up shit that Alexander gave any fuck about what they were doing because he was that hands off. He did not care. As long as they weren't uprising, he did not give a shit. They had their god, they had their priests, and they stayed out of trouble. They stayed out of his hair. They let him pass through on his way to Egypt. That's all he cared about. The Ptolemaic rulers continued this approach. So even after Alexander was gone, for the first 100 and so years of the Hellenistic period, the Jews really self-governed. Nobody bothered them. They stayed there, and their high priest led them, and things were relatively calm. The priests continued to write your Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, all that stuff, as a way to galvanize their control. But you started to have a division here between Pharisees and Sadducees. Pharisees, basically, the easy way to describe this difference is that the Pharisees believe all the magical shit. Pharisees believe that there is a heaven, there's a hell, there are angels, there are demons, that all that shit is real. The Sadducees think that it's all theater, and they hold only to the first 5 books. They don't read any of the prophetary works or anything. They hold just to those 5 books that they had just written right then as the law of Moses, and that should be followed, but again, that it was more of an administrative thing to help them run the country, not that any of this crazy stuff was actually real. And that schism would begin to cause some infighting now. Eventually, shortly after 200, the Seleucid Empire, they kind of wrestled control and administration of this away from the Ptolemaic rulers. They took a more hands-on approach. It did not work well. Yeah, who's the one person to tell you how to do a thing? Yeah, the Seleucids, they decided that they needed to be more hands-on. Mainly what it was is they needed money. They had gotten their ass handed to them by the up-and-coming Romans and were paying a huge tribute to them. Well, they decided that they would help raise some of this money on the backs of the Jews. And one of the ways they decided to go about doing that was putting an altar to the Greek gods inside the Jewish temple, which you can imagine how that went over. And they also were like, hey, you got to pay to come use this. And yeah, every time you come to temple, you have to offer something to our God as well as to your God. The Jews were outraged, and it led to Judas Maccabeus deciding, yeah, like a lead balloon shaped like a Greek god. That's exactly how it went over. Well, and Judas Maccabeus said, I've had a fucking enough. I'm not dealing with this. He had some brothers, Judah Maccabeus, all of them. They were like, yeah, we're done. Fun fact, the Maccabeus means the hammer. So we're talking about Judah and Judas the hammer. It's great. They proceeded to kick the Greeks' asses despite being outnumbered all over Palestine. Like, it did not go well. The Seleucids just continually got battered senseless by these upstarts until, again, Palestine became way more fucking trouble than it was worth for them. Yes, he had a brother, Judah Maccabeus. It should come as no surprise that the books produced during this time focus on the divine right of the clergy to rule and in the importance in rebuilding and purifying the temple, which eventually happened in 164. Finally, the Seleucids were like, we're done, we left, and the Maccabees cleaned up their temple. Eventually, in 160, Judah Maccabees lost a decisive battle where finally the Seleucids just overwhelmed them with numbers, and most of his men ran off like cowards. He chose to fight to the death, bravely or as an idiot. You decide which makes more sense. But he died, but the die had been cast, and the Greek Empire was crumbling anyway. The Romans were kind of taking over, and again, at the very beginning, the Romans kind of felt the same way. That just leave these people be. And again, here's some of the texts that these people came up with to justify their rule. It said in Chronicles, "Now behold, God is with us at our head, and his priests with the signal trumpets to sound the alarm against you. O Israel, do not fight against the Lord God of your fathers, for you will not succeed. Listen to the priests, do what the priests say, don't fucking argue with them." And in Ezra, this Ezra went up from Babylon, and he was a scribe skilled in the law of Moses. See, that's what's important. Which the Lord God of Israel had given, and the king granted him all that he requested, because the hand of the Lord his God was upon him. Again, kings not important. You know what's important? The priests. Follow the priests. Again, Rifskock points the way. Lamentations 1:1. "How deserted lies the city, once so full of people. How like a widow she is. She was once great among nations. She was a queen among the province, has now become a slave." So once again, that's what they're telling you, is that, you should follow us. And if you don't follow us, God's going to... Remember when we were exiled? God will totally do that again. We have to just, listen to the priests. We don't need kings. We don't need, anything else. We just need our religious setup. So now that the Maccabees have, won a pseudo-independence for the Jews, they're going to focus a little more on some other writing. Stupid fucking ads. Oh, that's funny. So now, the Jews have their pseudo-independence at first. They won the independence. It was a calm period around 60 years, from 129 to about 63. This is when Daniel was produced, which, people love to say that it was, Daniel's this book of prophecy. No, Daniel's a historical book, written in a very colorful manner, which now, again, if you don't use Riff's cock, then you would think that it was written way earlier and that it was prophesying. No, it was written as a very flavorful history text, and also a bunch of palace intrigue stories, because, hey, you got to give the people something to read, right? Romans took control around 63 BCE and eventually installed our old buddy Herod on the throne in 37 BCE. This effectively ended the rule of the clergy and created a vassal state. The stories of Esther and Ruth appeared during this time as tales to inspire and remind the populace that God was more powerful than kings. Ruth, she was a judge. Garlic bread is good. I'll base a religion on that. Esther, as we talked about, was, the tale of when they had been under the Persians, and, Esther married a king, supposedly, and saved them from annihilation by Haman, even though that story makes no sense, because why would you massacre all your slaves? That seems dumb. They're your slaves. That'd be like, I burned all my property because it looked at me funny. Like, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. But they serve to remind you that even though you've got kings now, you got kings, God is who's in charge, and that's what they really wanted people to remember. A constant theme of all of the books produced then was that one day God would deliver them from oppression for good. Remember, we talked about it a couple weeks ago, Herod was not well liked. Nobody was a fan of that guy. And so having him sit on the throne was a form of oppression in and of itself. The clergy now realized that they had lost this privileged position that they had maintained for a few centuries of basically running the state. Now that that was gone, they weren't real happy about it. And so the book of Daniel, again, also shows kings come and go. God is forever. Esther, it doesn't matter how powerful the king is, God can overrule him. Ruth is, hey, no matter how bad the odds look, God's got your back. Yeah, it's our sister church, the Church of the Flying Spaghetti Monster. So again, I hope that makes it make more sense to you. We're going to look at the timeline one more time, just because, again, I think this will help you understand what we just went through now. So again, Riff's chronological order context key, the Riff's Cox system. It's surefire, works every time, unless it's been drinking. You have the monarchic social justice prophets, those first guys. That was back when the northern tribes and the southern tribes were still a thing. Then, as they're falling apart, you get the books of the doom talking about them falling apart. Our stories from exile. All of that happened so that they could set up this priestly system where the priests would run things. While the priests are there, they make sure to back up all their stuff, get all their rules written down, all of that stuff, so that, again, they've solidified their authority. Then they write some fancy stuff, and, again, this is all just more fluff and, feeding into the priestly narrative. And then when they actually achieve independence, but then eventually end up with a king that they don't really like, what do they say? Hey, don't worry. Kings aren't important. God is what's important. And for those of you that have the very good eye and notice, but Riff, you left 2 books of the Old Testament out. I did. I did not mention Joel, and I did not mention Proverbs. And the reason is, it is impossible to date those books. Proverbs was likely compiled over a millennia. They're just platitudes that existed in some form or another through all forms of Jewish history. We have no idea when that book was written or by who. They attribute it to Solomon, and again, which makes you believe on the Riff's Cox system that it would be, very early on. We have no idea. So I didn't put it on there because, again, there's not a lot of meat to that. It's just little platitudes and wise sayings. It doesn't further any type of story narrative. The book of Joel, similarly, some people like to believe that it was actually the oldest book in the Bible and that it was written even before Amos and them. Others would say that it's actually one of the last books of the Old Testament and that it was written during the Maccabean period. We just don't know because the first 2 chapters of Joel were found in the Dead Sea Scrolls, but it's only the first 2 chapters. And what it looks like happened with Joel is that there may have been a prophet named Joel who wrote the first 2 books. And it's very murky. It seems like he's kind of referencing things that are happening in his day. And he refers to the Temple of Jerusalem being destroyed as something that happened in the past. But we're not sure. And then the book turns into an apocalyptic book for the next couple chapters after that. Those were likely tacked on years later by somebody else. We just don't know. But that book, again, it's a smaller book in the Bible that doesn't really further the narrative one way or another, but it honestly has about a 700-year period that there are certain scholars who will make an argument for anywhere in that 700-year period that the book of Joel was written. So I left it out because there's lots of places you could date it. But I hope now that you've all seen Riff's Cock, you now understand that this whole thing is organized very politically. Originally these books were produced with definitive political motivation for every bit of it. There is a reason these got written down when they got written down. But then you lose all that when you shuffle the order and pretend that the order that they're placed in your Bible is an actual chronological story. It's a political detection tool. Riff's Cock stiffens right up when there's politics going on. It stands up to stiff scrutiny. But yeah, I hope this makes sense to you now. That what was going on here was these books were written not when God inspired them to be written. They were written when it was politically convenient for them to be written. And does that take the shine off a lot of them? Yeah, absolutely. That's the point. That's what we're talking about here. These were political hit pieces bent to serve the ruling class and keep the subjects subjugated. The only exception would be those first few books that we talked about that are the most relevant books in the Bible today. They were the ones that were actually written with a different political agenda, in that they weren't trying to reinforce the power structure, they weren't trying to help the ruling class continue to exploit the working class. No, actually, they were written for quite the opposite. And that's why we never talk about them today. So I challenge you, go read those old books. And if you're going to spend any time in the Bible, spend time in those. They are still relevant to you today. They're relevant whether you believe in a big fucking space dragon, a flying spaghetti monster, or holy garlic bread. Whether you believe in any of those books are still relevant because their central theme is to be decent to those who have less than you and to help them, not exploit them. If you can't get behind that message, fuck right off. That's all there is to it. That's the message. That's the message in a nutshell. There's worthwhile shit in the Bible. It's those 4 or 5 books at the very end of the Old Testament that no one ever reads. It to me is very telling that they were stuffed there because there is no reason to stuff them there other than you're attempting to hide them in plain sight. Honestly, the more I read them, the more I am amazed that they even made it into the book because they are so disadvantageous to all the pricks that exploit people by using this book. Yeah, vaguely surprised they're still included. I could not agree more. Thank you for being here, everyone, this week. We're going to take some time off to get ready for season 4, to recharge my biblical batteries, and just get ready for fun. But we're going to start season 4 off doing the same thing we did today. We're going to whip Riff's cock back out and apply it to the New Testament. I hope you are ready for that, because it's going to be even spicier than this. Because if you think this was politically motivated, wait till you hear what I'm going to say next season. But thank you so much for being here. Barry, thank you for being here. Bale, anybody who was lurking, thank you so much. I greatly appreciate it. I enjoy our Sunday mornings together. May you go on and enjoy the rest of this year and the rest of this day. I hope that everyone has a great rest of your Sunday. Take care and live the words of Amos and Micah. Be good to those with less than you. Do something nice for them. Be good to those with more than you. How about just be good? Well, let's distill the entire Bible down to just be good. So be well, my friends. We will see you in a few weeks. I will update you in the cord when we are coming back for season 4. Real Scary will still go on in the meantime, and there will be some streams with myself and Declan coming up soon too. Thank you, everybody. Have a great rest of your Sunday.